Hello, and welcome back to Align Your Stars podcast. I'm your host, astrologer, transformational life coach, and energy healer, Lumi Pelinku. Today, we're going to be interviewing a wonderful client of mine, as well as a new friend, and she is just an incredible author. She writes fantasy romance, and she includes mythology, the Greek myths into her writings. Stunning imagery in her writing style. I'm telling you, it's really beautiful. Her catalog is available wherever books are sold and are accessible through Kindle Unlimited. In addition to writing, Molly Tullis is a prominent content creator and consultant. She provides author services to help other writers market their stories, and her bestseller is called The Consort of Darkness. So it sounds a little juicy right now. We'll definitely take a deep dive into exploring what this book is about, and as well as her upcoming projects. And her story is very unique as to how she has uncovered her ties, and as well as longing to explore the Greek mythology, and as well as other historical events in the past. So we'll take a deep dive into exploring those realms as well. So we are going to be inviting Molly Tullis to the room right now, and I'm very excited for you to meet her. Okay, so we have Molly Tullis in the room right now. How are you, hon?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing really well. Cannot wait to explore your content, and as well as all of the developments leading you to this moment now as we are talking today. So anybody who doesn't know much about you, can you tell us a bit about your background and what has inspired you to start writing books leaning towards the great Greek myths? I would love to know.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have always been a writer. I was that child who was like scribbling notes into composition notebooks and writing novels. And I was always a very voracious reader. I went into a career in communications, but it was always in the back of my mind. And I knew I wanted to write. And really, it was in 2020, go figure, 2021, maybe around that time. I got into the world of self-publishing and sort of realized I have a marketing background. I don't need to wait for anyone else to do this. I can do it now. So that kind of kickstarted me on getting these stories out there. I have always loved Greek mythology. I was raised in a very strict Christian environment, and it was sort of like a secret passion of mine where, like, when we went over it in schools, I was all over it because I was like, oh, this is my chance to learn about it. So always something that I've been through, especially because I do pay very close attention to astrology, and that is a huge passion of mine. It's something that is very in line with my spiritual beliefs as well. It's a huge part of my life. So doing Greek myths naturally became it just was a supernatural fit. It was what I was most passionate about. With this series specifically that I've started on, I wanted to do focus on mainly chthonic gods, so underworld gods, and specifically some of the female goddesses who don't have a lot of their own stories out there. So we've all heard myths about Zeus, we've all heard myths about, Aphrodite and all of that, and I respect those deities, but there's just not enough good spooky underworld stories to go around, in my opinion.
I agree. And even in astrology, as you know, and probably some people who follow me as well, I work a lot with the asteroid goddesses. It's really interesting how in astrology, especially when you begin to learn about the Greek myths, it's always catered towards the masculine gods, as you mentioned. Yep. But even when we're learning astrology, we're learning about the major planets, such as the Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Those are all the masculine gods, the big bad, and then there's Venus and the moon. The Venus and the moon are all secluded on the side. They're the only feminine, feeble, demure figures.
Yeah, demure.
Demure. And, I love working with asteroids. And as you probably know, we covered quite a lot of ground with the asteroid goddesses. We have Ceres, there's Demeter. We also have Vesta. We have Juno, who's also known as Hera, and as well as Pallas, also known as Athena. They all represent the gifts, the hidden gifts that we have in our birth chart, which could build up our own creative processes in life, and how we could really step into an optimal flow as well as women, but even men, if ever they want to navigate through brainstorming, finding creative solutions to things, that's more the creative side, which is the right side, the feminine. The masculine is about just direct force and just getting to point A to point B. Whereas the femininity is about conjuring all these ideas and really just stepping into that path of finding some kind of creative solution to things. And the same applies to how all these goddesses work together too. Because they were
Yeah.
all the thinkers. They're the thinkers, and as
Yeah.
well as they always conspired things against each other. Not saying in a bad way, but like I love the
There's
Greek
a
myths as
lot
well.
of collaboration. Yeah.
For sure.
I'm writing another book in this Greek series right now. And I was just texting my best friend and my writing partner. And I was like, I changed the ending again. And she was like, it happens. I'm like, I don't know what to tell you. It just happened. And like the
Mhm.
gods changed their mind. And now this ending has more politicking, more collusion. So it's so funny because it definitely has that same energy and spirit around, lots of collaboration and being crafty and coming up
Mhm.
with that. So they are very fun characters to write when
I
you're
love
doing
your
gods.
I also love your big three. I didn't even mention it before, and I have them right in front
Yeah.
of me, but it's like you're a Scorpio Sun, Taurus
Uh-huh.
rising, and Moon
Uh-huh.
and Gemini. I mean, oh my
Yeah.
gosh, like you are such a poetic storyteller, visionary. You
Yeah.
love taking the deep dive into dark things as well. Like as you said,
Yeah.
all the gods, the goddesses, particularly, you like to like
Mm-hmm.
go to the underworld and explore their realms.
Yeah.
So how did you feel like even growing up? Like, did you feel natural gravitation towards these specific goddesses, or where in your journey did you start discovering Nyx? For one, she's the consort of darkness. I love that.
Yes.
I was just like Nyx of all people. Like I work closely
Yeah.
with her as well. But like, how did you find these figures and like, and as well as the teachings? Because in Greek mythology, we don't really know a lot about Nyx particularly, and as well as the
Right.
additional dark goddesses. But like, how did it come to be for you?
Absolutely. So my spiritual practice became, I would say, very polytheistic when I was deconstructing a couple years ago from mainstream Christian theology. I still work with like Jesus Christ as a deity all the time, and there's like
Mhm.
plenty of Christian aspects that are still in my practice, but I deconstructed from what I like to call the colonialist, monotheistic, Abrahamic Christian view to a much more, polytheistic, quite literally view. And I just leaned into Hellenism because it was familiar to me. I knew who the gods were. I remember a passion for these mythology stories from a very young age. So the passion for the stories came first when I was a child. And then when I was sort of deconstructing and defining my own spiritual practice, I was like, well, I feel like I know these guys. I'm familiar. And Nyx in particular, Hades and Persephone were easy.
Mhm.
That one came
Yes.
very, I mean, Pluto is Hades, as we know,
Mhm.
and all that. So that was very seamless. Hecate kind of came in after Nyx. I remember when I was thinking about writing my books, which are also very much, this series has been huge in my deconstruction process because it's really helpful for me to take ownership and write out these stories of the gods who I work with. So it's been a healing process for me, but I set out to do Nyx because I was Googling, like, okay, now what stories do I want to do? I don't necessarily want to do retellings of the ones that are common. We've got a lot that focus on the major pantheon, the big 12, like they're featured quite a bit. And I found one line in my research. I found one line that has stuck with me for years now. And it was the fact that we didn't know very much about Nyx. And they said the one thing we know about Nyx is that she was the one god that Zeus was afraid of.
Mhm.
And like chills. I still get chills to this day. She was the one goddess. She's a Titan. She predates some of the pantheon as well. And she's the one that Zeus was afraid of. And I was like, if the one thing we know about her is that this king of the gods, was scared of her, why are there no stories about Nyx?
Mhm.
And that, then I was like, well, I picked that up as a mantle. I was like, well, it's my job to write one, then I guess we're doing this. So I set out to do one. All of them are also inherently romances because I love a romance personally,
Mhm.
and really wanted to do elements. The thing that's so interesting is in a lot of my books, the couples and the romantic elements are derived from myth. Like they don't exist. They're not, it's not, other than like Hades and Persephone, obviously.
Mhm.
But Nyx and Erebus are one of the few couples in my books who also exist in the traditional mythology. And I found that so interesting from their dynamics, not even as like a romantic relationship, but also as a reflective of the relationship we have with ourselves. Because she's the feminine aspect. She is night, and he's the masculine aspect, and he's darkness, which is synonymous, but also like very distinct and different positions. Like, what does that look like? And, to me, everything is a spectrum. I don't think that there's really a gender binary at all. I think it's just a spectrum of energy that everybody possesses.
Yes.
So writing out that manifestation of a more skewed feminine character and a more skewed masculine character, and what that looked like when their roles were so similar and so different, so much of that was a reflection of my personal journey just within. And then, in writing it out, it became the romantic relationship between the two of them. But I stumbled into it, and the next book was always going to be so special for me because it's the first book in the series. But I remember I latched on to that. The only thing that I could really find about her that everybody said was, yeah, Zeus was afraid of her. And I was like, well, then who is this badass? Like, why don't we have more? What the hell? So then I set out to write more.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And she's also an astrologer that we work with, astrologers.
Yeah.
Like, not many astrologers work with her though. And Nick's also in astrology, like if you're casting in the birth chart, she's a representation of like where you can seek out the void. It's like in a way like the cocoon phase in our life journey, but it's the area where we could seek out the most inspiration.
Yeah.
Because she is
so
night.
Good.
She's night. She's possibility. She holds the stars.
Yeah.
Because it's like she's like the cloak of stars. That's what it is. It's like, even though
I think that's so funny. I think there's literally a direct line where I talk about her being cloaked with stars, and like I think I think that language almost exactly is in there. Yes. And there's so much that I got to write about her being like this powerhouse, but also this place of respite, and it is rest because it is night, but also like there's so much authority in that, and authority in rest, and like authority kind of in the oblivion, which just, I'm such a Scorpio heavy baby. Like,
I love it.
That's where no, lean into the darkness. Like, jump into the void.
And I see that,
so
especially like in people's birth charts, like it's like the place where we could tap into the heavens in our life experience. Yeah. Like that's where we have that divine, like the divine connection to all, because she is all in a way. Like, so if you look at the galaxies, or if you look at the universe, she's like the darkness in between, but she's also holding space for the mass of the stars, and stars technically are masculine because they're light. So it's just like she's the one who holds, and she's the one who cradles the light.
Yeah, holds it all together.
It's so poetic, and I love it. And it's like definitely your Scorpio stellium that contributes to that like power that you have, and as well as that, you embrace the shadow self, but you also bring light into the shadow self as well. Because that's the Gemini Moon figure. It's just stunning because it's like a beautiful way, and it's such different signs, like Gemini, Scorpio, like they're totally they're so quincunx. Like quincunx is like definitely different territory altogether. But whenever you have like a quincunx sun, which is the sun's in Scorpio, and quincunx is the aspect in between with the moon, when those two are not really conversing so much with each other, you actually create such incredible content, because you always felt that way within yourself as well. Like where you're out of place, misunderstood, or you just didn't really know how to express so much. But that was more when you delved into the intensity of within yourself, and you drew it out within the pages so that you wrote.
I certainly it was a very spiritual experience, right? Like getting them all down, and it continues to be.
How did the imagery come through to you though? Like when you work with it, like the energies, or when you are connecting with them, with the archetypes of the gods and goddesses, how does it come to you?
I have a very, very like visual mind, I feel. So for me, my number one strategy, and this, if you get it, you get it. And if you don't, just don't worry about it. But there have been plenty of times when I will sit down to write, to tap into these energies and these images, because like they are deities that I work with. I've got readers who don't understand that part of, my spiritual practice, of course, but like, yes, I'm writing a story, but also these are very literally deities that I work with. So for me, people joke about like you hit a runner's high or like a writer's trance, and like that writer's trance kind of does take on a whole new meaning. It's very, very visual for me. So I will type with my eyes closed. I will put on I'm very specific to what I listen to when I write. A lot of times there's so many great like YouTube and Spotify playlists that is literally like Greek meditative music that is all flute and stuff like that. So I will play that specifically. And a lot of times when I feel like I'm most inspired, I am writing with my eyes closed. I'm not even looking at the screen. I'm just typing with my eyes closed because it does play across my brain like photos, and I can kind of see these energies coming to life and what that might look like and what it feels like to tap into that like feminine, ultra powerful, like abyss type of energy, especially for Nyx. Getting to do that was so wonderful, but it was 100% a spiritual experience. So for me, I do see them in my mind's eye, if you will. Yeah. It's very much, I feel like I write like a reader. Like when you read things, obviously like your brain conjures up those pictures. Yeah. I kind of have the pictures conjure up in my brain and then I write them down. If I ever get stuck, if I'm ever have writer's block, that's my number one trick too, is like, well, just picture it in your head and start writing what you can see in your head. And that typically will get the scene down and will help me create the scene made manifest. So it's a very meditative and spiritual process for me for writing. It's very personal, and I won't always write about, I won't do Greek mythology, the series, forever. I've got a couple more books planned in this series, but I don't ever think writing will ever not be a very spiritual process for me.
Yeah, I definitely see that also with like your Mercury Pluto conjunct, because Pluto's the area or the planet that has to do with our ability to tap into the other side. Yeah. It's also like, because Pluto represents death and the ability of seeing beyond the veil. So Mercury is the messenger, as you know. It's all about bringing that message and it to others, to the collective. And this just shows, like, also in your birth chart, it just shows that you're completely aligned. But I want to ask you, there are a lot of authors like in the industry that they put their own spin on the Greek myths. What sets your interpretation apart, and how do you stay true to the essence of the original stories?
Love that. So for me, what sets mine apart is I think I typically look at Greek mythology characters who don't have a lot of stories about them. I am planning Hades and Persephone novella, which will come out probably next year.
Oh my God, that sounds amazing.
Yeah. I know. This is like, anyone who's followed me for a long time, hilariously enough, when I announced the Greek mythology series, I said, don't ask me. I'm not doing Hades and Persephone. I know everybody expects me to, but I'm not going to do it. And that lasted like 6 months. And now, like, 100% I'm doing it because they've popped up as characters, as side characters in these other books. And now, like 4 books in, I'm like, I have to. This is out of my hands. I have to. So before that, but that's probably going to be the most recognizable folks that I'm going to do. Yeah. So I think what sets it apart is straight up a woman's point of view. Greek myths were typically, told by male orators and stuff like that. And, very much from the focus of men. Plenty of Greek myths involve, a lot of them involve women aren't historically treated well in Greek myths. It doesn't turn out well for them. There's a fascinating book by Sarah Pomeroy called, I'm looking at it right now, it's called Goddesses, Whores, Wives, and Slaves. And it looks at women in classical antiquity, and they basically fall into like one of 4 buckets, very similar to the Madonna, like kind of horror complex.
Madonna horror complex. Yes.
Yeah, very similar for that. So one, I have tried to completely obliterate that in my writing, in my retelling. So I think what makes them different is they focus on gods and goddesses who don't have a lot of stories told about them, and they're being written by a woman. Like I know Perseus is a great Greek hero for, slaying the Medusa. He is the shittiest douchebag in all. He has also shown up as a side character in a couple of mine, and I feel bad for Medusa. Oh, I feel so bad for Medusa.
Terrible for her. She was victimized.
Absolutely victimized. Victimized. So that's one of those things where, like, every time he pops up, I have it, I think literally yesterday or earlier today, I don't remember what it was. Like, I was writing dialogue and Perseus pops up in the book that I'm working now in the underworld after his death. And so many people, and I have people poking fun at the fact about like, you didn't do anything. Like, how is a woman in hiding bothering you? Like, you're an asshole. So like, he shows up all the time, not all the time, but like when he shows up, it's like, he's a dick. Like, Medusa was a victim. Like, he's not a hero.
Yeah, Perseus.
So I think
for anybody who
what,
doesn't know about Perseus'
yes.
story with Medusa, just so we can explain it to people, just in simple context.
Yeah.
Do you want to explain Cliff Notes version?
I'm happy to. Yeah,
Yes.
I'm happy. So,
Go for it.
story of Medusa. I'm gonna get some of it wrong, but essentially, she was the victim of sexual assault.
Yes.
And then she was turned into a gorgon with, you know, the hair of snakes
because of
turning
Athena.
people to stone. Yeah, because of Athena. Medusa essentially was so beautiful. Of course, it was her fault. She was so beautiful. Unfortunately, she was a victim of sexual assault, and then Athena had her cursed and turned her into a gorgon with the hair of the snakes, turning people to stone. When she went to Athena for help, because Athena was an acolyte, and you know, she was very much the original like victim blaming story essentially. And then she became this monster, which I'm air quoting heavily, and she went to hide in a cave because she you know, had been through such a traumatic event. And then Perseus was a demigod. He was a son of Zeus, an immortal woman. And to obtain his godhood, because he was only a demigod, he was tasked with going and slaying Medusa, who nobody could kill because her vision turned people into stone. And he famously used his shield as a mirror to reflect that back and to slay the Medusa. So in typical mythology, he has been held a hero for killing the Gorgon Medusa. But, you know, as we revisit that, she is a victim and has, I think, luckily received quite the reputation, you know, uplift in the past couple of years. A lot of people, when you tell that story now, understand her plight. So, yeah, so I think that's one of the things that makes them different is, in my books, he's not one of the most infamous Greek heroes. He's an asshole.
Yes.
So that's something that I set out.
Yeah. It shows so much also, like in terms of the archetypes that play out in people's birth charts, including yours. Yeah. We live simultaneously with these Greek myths or myths that have been written already.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting how, like, when you explore the dynamic between Medusa being the victim for calling out as to her, you know, being defiled, and then Perseus being the savior and killing her for being defiled, where she was thought of as evil because she said something about her trauma, what she's experienced. It goes into play as to like what happens now, even in the modern times, like how when you do speak up about certain things, you shouldn't be defiled. You shouldn't be killed for it or being persecuted, if any.
And I think when it comes to like interpreting, what sets them apart and how do you interpret myths like this? Again, I speak to, you know, I have a couple of other friends who also have done Greek myths, and we say all the time, we said it was originally an oral tradition, Greek myths and Greek mythology, and they changed all the time depending on who was telling them because it was an oral tradition for so long. Some of it wasn't, because obviously the Greeks had plenty of reading and writing and, you know, things like that. But for the most part, it was very much an oral tradition. And we always say, by continuing to tell these stories, that is and it doesn't really matter if we've made interpretations based on the current context, because that's how things were always told. They were always told by a new perspective based on current context, because that's just the nature of storytelling. So that is something for me where when it comes to interpreting them, we have always been, you know, we're like, hey, we're just the next one in a very long line of people who are historically retelling, you know, this myth. So I think that is something that's always like, it's a responsibility I don't take lightly. You know, I look at it very much as like, I'm just next in a very long line of people that will also continue after me to continue to retell these stories, but it contextualizing them and adding like my personal perspectives and perspectives from the world around me that we currently live in. That is the essence of myth sharing, and that's the essence of retelling. So if you're doing that, then from my perspective, you're fine. You're retelling exactly the way that they would have retold it thousands of years ago. So the same principles apply.
I feel like even these stories are all embedded in us.
Yeah.
we have some sense of knowing as to how it ends, or as well as like what they've gone through in terms of the trials and like success in their life
I
story.
think it's
We know subconsciously of how it ends.
there's a wonderful, I'm pretty sure that it is from, yes, exactly. So it's from Erin Morgenstern. If you've ever read the book Starless Sea, which is one of my favorite books of all time. Me and my writer friends, we got like matching Starless Sea tattoos when we were in Greece together. Like, it is one of my favorites. And there's a quote from that book that says, we are all stardust and stories. And that to me is just sums it up beautifully, because it's true. We are all made of stardust and stories, and all of
Yes.
these myths are just archetypes and plot lines that we have lived out before and we will live out again, and come to, you know, metabolize in our own lives in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
So I've always felt, especially writing mythology, like the story is already in you in a way, because you are just part of a grand tradition.
Yes.
And
I love that you
it's,
said that.
yeah, it's like very humbling. But that is something that when there are days where I'm like, I don't know, like any creative, you have days where you doubt yourself and you're kind of like, what am I doing? Is this going to work? You know, whatever, being in a creative industry. And then I just always kind of lean back on like, well, it doesn't really matter, because it's not about me, because I'm just another, and in a beautiful way, you know, I'm just another speck in this long line of these traditions. And I just have to uphold my part in retelling the ones that I feel are on me to retell. And then you kind of have this wonderful, like, it doesn't really, in a beautiful way, it doesn't matter, because we are all stardust and stories. I'm just one piece of this grand tradition. And I get to have fun with it. And it sure is fun.
And it's like, it's up to you, and as well as everybody, depending on whatever gifts that we have, we're meant to illuminate the path for others.
Yep.
And as you said, it was the best quote ever. We're all made of stardust and stories. And in other words, depending on which storyline you want to live into. And I said that before, even before recording this, I drew a card before just saying like, what storyline are you living in? And I said that because do you want to live the path of Perseus, or do you want to live the path of that? Do you want to live, because it all depends on like what you choose. And that's power, and as well as our divine spark that we all hold inside, because we all have that free will decision to decide what we want to take, what path we want to take. You know, it's just like, don't fall into that victimhood or the persecutorhood. You know, Perseus actually, I just don't ever like Perseus very much. Like,
no, neither do I.
I was like, no, I know we're really like hating on Perseus during this podcast. I'm loving it.
I'm fine with that. I will always condone Perseus slander.
Oh my gosh. Do you feel that there's like any lesser known Greek myths or characters that you feel deserve more attention and exploration for contemporary literature?
I mean, I think my first biggest two were Nyx and Hecate, which is why I did them first. They are both my absolute favorites. I have Hecate's triple moon tattooed on my ankle.
Love it.
I think those two are so powerful. I mean, Hecate in particular is just, she's also the goddess of everything that I love. Ghosts, dogs, witchcraft, like she's got them all. Like it's fabulous. What a lineup of things to be a goddess of. So I think those two are really great. I'm very excited I will do Hades and Persephone, but I'm also doing a Hephaestus novel, because I feel like we don't get enough Hephaestus.
Explain Hephaestus. Because in all honesty, I've never read much into Hephaestus before.
So his kind of original, we don't have too many like stories about him. So he shows up as a side character in a lot. He doesn't have too many myths that are 100% about him. Which that's immediately where my sensors go, like, that's where you got to write one.
There's an opportunity.
So he was born of Hera, and she was not pleased. So she, very literally, the story is she threw him off Mount Olympus, which disfigured his face. So he has like, I mean, and again, the story is totally are very,
Aw.
very what it means. But most
Yeah.
people describe him as having like burns or a scar,
That's
a
like
little bit of
Phantom of the Opera.
Phantom. I was about to say, I'm like very Phantom of the Opera.
I
Yeah.
love that.
Uh-huh. And
Wow.
he is the god of essentially like metallurgy and the forge.
Mm.
So crafting weapons, building things, very, very masculine skewing on the spectrum sort of energy about creation and building. He was the one who like created Zeus's lightning bolts. Like he makes all of the weapons for the gods.
Wow.
But the part that I'm going to redeem, or I'm going to set out to redeem, is he was married to Aphrodite essentially as a punishment to Aphrodite
Hmm.
because Zeus wanted to rein her in a little bit. And because she's so gorgeous, goddess of love, all these things, they said, you know, as a punishment, they were going to marry her to the quote unquote, the ugly god.
Mm.
And there's lots and lots of stories around she was actually in a relationship with Ares and sort of had Hephaestus in this position of humiliation his whole life because everybody's like, yeah, you know, just constantly kind of dogging on him. Like, you're married to the most beautiful goddess, but like she steps out on you all the time. Like, she only married you as a punishment. So we don't get a lot of redemption for that. And I think that there's so much of, but he also never spoke out. He never, you know, there's very few stories of him ever speaking out in anger.
Mhm.
He's one of the few, granted, I have not read every single Greek myth that exists, but to my knowledge, I'm aware of no mythology of him ever seeking revenge or retribution of any kind. He still continued to just sort of like do his job. And I think that there's a really wonderful balance of sort of masculine and feminine in that energy because like that had to be such a well-balanced archetype of a person to just be like, you know what, that's fine. It's not my business. Like, I'm just going to do my job because I love to do my work. That's what I want to focus on. And I don't really care about what other people say. There's also some mythology that he had a first wife before Aphrodite,
Hmm.
who's talked about way less, is only spoken about in like a couple of the Hephaestus cults. So very, very like way less spoken on. So I think he's such an interesting character just from an archetype. Because again, I think he's been done dirty by traditional pantheon because we just hear these stories of like, you know, Hera abandoned him because he was an ugly baby. And then, well, he was forced to be married to Aphrodite because he was quote unquote by their perceptions the ugly one, which is just like,
Yeah, to ridicule because of his imperfections.
yeah, yeah. So I think that there's, but then also like there's no story of him one day just going like finally snapping. Like like he's so stoic throughout
Ah.
all of the stories. And I think I think the earth sign in me, like the Taurus rising, is very like, that's so, I want to dig into that I want to peel that apart and sit with that energy, just that stoic, calm, like very literally whatever is happening around me, I'm not concerned about because I'm just gonna do my job. And I want to peel that back and I want to focus on that. So I'm super
I love
excited. I
that.
think Nyx and Hecate were the two where I was like, we need more stories. We got to have more. And
Yes.
I wrote those first. But I'm also super excited to focus on Hephaestus because I think that there's so
Mhm.
much to peel and sort of pick apart with that guy.
It makes sense because you're like you're an anaretic degree. I don't know if you knew that about your rising sign Taurus. You're 29 degrees.
Oh.
You're the end of the Taurus sign. That
Oh.
means that you carry lots of ancient wisdom and you like to like pinpoint all of the angles of the human experience, and you see all angles of the human experience and who you interact with. Like you see basically like you're a natural born like empathic person who sees
Yeah.
everything like 360
Yeah.
degree turn. And therefore like somebody who has an anaretic degree in their chart, specifically the ascendant sign, you just have a lot of like a lot of stuff stored inside you that's meant to expel a lot out.
Yeah.
And that also
Yeah.
reflects into the writing that you do. And even talking about Hephaestus, you're like, I want to dig very deep in terms of
Yeah.
why is he so stoic? Is there more to it to him that meets the eye in regards to that stoicism that he's going
Yeah.
through, you know? But it's
Yeah.
very fascinating. My gosh. Yes,
It'll be fun.
I know. And like, let's say like, I'd say, could you share like, I know going a little off topic, well, not really, but can you share a pivotal moment or experience in your life that's greatly shaped to who you are now?
Ooh, that is a good one. I think one of the most, I think one of the most genuinely, like one of the most pivotal moments was, I think, very early on in life. I was very lucky to travel. Pretty
Mhm.
much as soon as I graduated college and like had a little bit of like adult money, I was like budgeting for travel. Um, and I think that for me as a whole, I would say like the most pivotal thing for me was broadly like being able to get out and travel a little bit more, because I see the world in terms of stories.
Mhm.
I relate to the world in terms of stories. So very literally, like walking down the street, I can just pass somebody and like the nonsense elevator music of my brain is just like, what if they're going to do this? Like, I'll just come up with random little backstory, whatever. Like, I literally contextualize the world around me the way my internal monologue works by stories. And that sort of like romanticize your life kind of thing, main character energy. Like, I navigate the world through kind of contextualizing things like that. And I think for me, getting out and traveling helped me just really see more stories. And I think especially going to countries and like having, I traveled alone, which was also like a huge part of it, but like going to a lot of places that have like really 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 ancient stories. So like
Mm.
going to India, going to Thailand, going to Greece where I was last year, which was like it was a holiday, but it was basically a
Sealed
pilgrimage.
everything together when you went to Greece, probably.
Sealed everything together, like
Yeah.
sealed everything together. But I think it was a slow progression of like going to some of these places where I think like some of the earliest stories known to man were ever written, like in India, Thailand, like kind of Morocco, Greece, Turkey, like, you know, some of these cradle of civilization esque cultures, which are so much older than like the colonial American history, not American history, because obviously that's just as old, but the colonial American history. That to me helped me just really contextualize like, wow, look at the archetypes that are so similar. Like, look at these gods that are so similar. And it comes back to my deconstruction process because, you know, you start to look at how many cultures have stories of a great flood, right? How many cultures have, even going beyond what is like Abrahamic religion, but
Mhm.
really piecing together like, oh, well, there was a Hebrew god named Yahweh that predated Christian religions. And now you're going to say that that's just a name of the Christian god, but we actually have evidence of that being his own deity hundreds of years before that. So,
Mhm.
all in all, very roundabout answer. I think like
Mhm.
one of the most pivotal things that changed was that slow like accumulation of travel stories, because it helped me broaden my horizons very literally in the way that I started to see how all of these stories came together, and to be able to be super fortunate enough to have the time to go and be meditative and like have the time in some of these places to soak it in helped shift my worldview outward and helped me continue to kind of relate that inner world and that outer world and just help me keep telling stories. And that's really what kind of put me on the path, I think, was that sort of accumulation of all that travel. And then absolutely being in Greece last year, we absolutely were like, this is more of a pilgrimage than a holiday. You can call it a vacation, but
Wow.
we were like, it really was more of a, it was more of a big, it was a big deal for all of us. I was with writer friends as well who have also done Greek myths. So we were all, we weren't, we did some boat time and stuff like that, but we were like up early at museums, at the temples, like having a very emotional experiences and driving it all home.
Mhm.
So that was a wonderful, wonderful time.
You must have gone through a lot of shifts during that trip. Like
Oh
a
yeah.
lot of things were coming up because it's very whenever you go to a different location, particularly like different parts of the world, you're activating planet lines. Like I'm talking about
Yeah.
astrocartography. I never
Yeah.
really looked into that because I'm very curious, but I'm going to look into it right now. But whenever people go to different places, like different time zones and everything, it actually activates a planet. And I'm willing to bet it's going to activate something in
I'm
regards
sure.
to like what was happening to you during that trip that really moved you, like for anything. Like did you feel like you shifted quite a bit in that space?
Yeah, I feel like I shifted a lot in that space. also we were in Turkey for about 4 days prior, but then once we landed in Greece,
Mhm.
I ended up with a sore throat and a cold like immediately,
Mm.
and it was very warm weather. But I was like, okay, something is moving, something's on its way out, like
I
the
see
throat
why.
chakra, all of that. Yeah. I was like, okay, there's a lot here with like the undercurrents that have been disturbed in a good way, but like stuff is coming up
You're
and
on the
out. Like,
Venus line.
ah,
You're on your Venus line. So remember I was mentioning to you early in this recording because
yeah,
we had to reschedule this twice because of my sore throat. It's the
yeah,
throat area.
yeah.
So
Uh,
you're ruled by Venus, as you know, your Taurus rising, and then you
oh
literally
yeah.
went on your Venus line. So something you had to talk about,
Oh yeah.
something you had to
So
speak
that
up
I had
about.
a so that was very poignant, was I ended up with, it didn't affect any of my travel, which was good. Like I was still in very good spirits, but I very much was like pounding tea at every meal and like hot beverages because I was like, oh, I've got this travel cold that arose. We also went up to Delphi, which was a really powerful experience for all of us.
I'm willing to bet you did. Yeah.
Yes. One of my writer friends who I was with, Amy Quiverlinen, she's also very much into mythology and has shared a lot of these passions with me. And another one of my good friends who she's a practicing very spiritual person as well, and she reached out while we were there, and she was like, I just want you to know, I feel that like the group of us that were traveling there, it was me and my friend Amy and my friend Alyssa. She was like, I feel like you guys like go, but go with the understanding of like there's gonna be a very powerful spiritual trip for all of you.
Mm.
Just in terms of being there and also being there together, because there's definitely some soul relationships with me and both Amy and Alyssa, because we have discovered so much together and get to do so much together. So I had another like spiritual medium friend reach out and be like, are you going to Delphi? And I was like, yes, we are. And she was like, yeah, okay, that's like, I had a lot of crazy dreams while I was in Greece. um we were very emotional at all of the temple sites that we went to. It was very, very powerful. So that was such a reset and also such a connecting moment, because it very much was one of those things where we were like, we're standing in the places that these stories were originally told and where they were crafted.
Mm.
And for me, I had a couple books out in the series at that time, so I was going to locations where I'd written parts of my stories. So that for me also was just like so powerful, because I was like, oh, it's the theater of Dionysus, and I wrote a huge scene in that one book that took place at the theater of Dionysus. So it was such a tangible connection to that sometimes intangible past, and again, part of that grand tradition that we're a part of. So physically standing in it is such a big mindset shift, as opposed to obviously just like hearing about it. We also joked, I painted Apollo in a less than favorable light in one of my books that came out. He's a main deity and he's a man, so odds are I'm flipping the script with most of my deities in these stories. So I painted him in a slightly less than favorable light in the third book that had come out, which came out right before my trip. And then when I was visiting his temple, my Doc Martin leather sandal like snapped in two.
I'm
And
not
I and we
surprised.
and yeah, and we were all like, and while we were there, it literally happened, and we all just started laughing so hard. And I was like, all right, I get it. Like that's fair enough. Fair enough. Like no
Wow.
problem. I get it. Like I'm not mad about it. It's all good. I had him
You're like, I
repaired
guess
when I came back. But I was
the
like, all right, that
the
one's
scale
fair.
the scales have balanced right now. They
Yeah,
you
I'm like, we're
go
good.
for you.
It's all right. We're even.
Oh.
I get it. I'm not mad about it.
So you see
Um,
like how they all have specific specialties, each god and goddess and mythological character in life. I mean, of course, we have to hold an unconditional view towards them, their pitfalls, and as well as their good
yeah.
qualities as well. Keep
Well, that's
going.
what I think is so beautiful about this.
Yes.
There's a quote from, I believe it's Stephen Fry, but I think I'm going to misquote it. Um, Also, the fact that I had a traumatic Christian upbringing very much affects a lot of my spiritual views. So I don't mean any offense to anybody who still follows that practice. But there's a quote from Stephen Fry who says, I think he was talking to like an evangelical Christian. And I think he said, like, look, if I die, I go to the great beyond. He said, I would be more happy to see the 12 Greek gods standing there than the current iteration. I'm going to say that. I'm going to say the current iteration of the evangelical American Christian God. I'm going to be very specific. Said I would be so much happier to see the Greek Parthenon there because they don't pretend to be anything else than who they are. Mm-hmm. And they have flaws and they lean into those flaws and they don't mind. Whereas especially in the environment that I grew up in, there was no criticizing God. There was no because like everything he does is perfect and outright and there can be no criticism of it. But I love that. He said, I would be happier to see the Greek gods because they never pretend to be anything other than who they are. And they have the full facet of human emotions. And I think when we look at our own individual spiritual practices, how we relate to the world, how we relate to ourselves, there's that shadow side. It's so important to understand that side and to be 360. So I love showing a 360 view of all of the gods, no matter what side it is, because I think it's important. And I think it's leading into that shadow side. It's leading into the underworld, your personal, everybody's got a personal underworld, whatever it is. Yes. So I think leaning into that is so important because the Greek gods never pretend to be anything else than who they are, which some of them are obviously caricatures and there's some extremes in there, but that's why I think only my sandal snapped. It was a very minor intrusion. So,
but it's very interesting. Do you feel that like also for people who are living amongst each other, do you feel like we're actually semblances of gods?
Yeah, absolutely.
What's your take on that?
Absolutely. I mean, my spiritual practice is one thing. And I also think it's so important to in one of the biggest problems I had with like my specific Christian upbringing was there was such a divide between me and the God I thought I worshiped. And that can only create, because spiritual practices are so personal, that can only create divide in yourself. You're only going to mimic that because it comes down to that. And now I'm going to quote RuPaul, which is, how the hell are you going to love yourself if you can't, how the hell is anybody else going to love you if you can't love yourself? How are you going to love anybody else if you can't love yourself? Like that kind of thing. So I think we all carry elements of divinity in us because we are part of this grand tradition, and we are all part of matter that has been recycled, and energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transmuted. So I think all of us carry similarities to deities in these ways. I think we all see ourselves, especially in Greek mythology. I mean, there have been hundreds and hundreds and thousands of religions since the dawn of man, and there's a reason that these stories, pervade as much as they do, and why they're still relatable, thousands of years later. So I think that absolutely we all have pieces of that in us. And I think to recognize it and to work with it is a big part of my spiritual practice and has been so elemental in all of my development. And, then who I am as a writer as well, I think pursuing those elements in gods and seeing that. So yeah, absolutely. I think 100% there's elements of that in all of us. And that was also something that was very healing for me, growing up with such a derision in my spiritual practice between the God you worshipped and yeah. There was such derision there because you're nothing. You're born a sinner, you'll die a sinner, and like
there's like no hope in it,
there's like, no hope in it.
Where's the solution here? Like, where's the empowerment?
There's no empowerment. It's a hell of a way to kind of create any sort of self-identity or self-love, like when that's the practice you're a part of. So yeah, I lean very much on there's pieces of deities in us, especially in characteristics and traits and stuff like that, and connecting to that and is so important. And I think that brings in, of course, as well, looking at shadow work and the underworld, your personal underworld.
That's what heals.
Because that's what heals, absolutely. Because again, with childhood background I had, you didn't work with the underworld. Like that was all for sins and sinners, and you didn't there was such a line in the sand. You didn't work with the underworld gods. Like, are you kidding me? Like there was only one, and it was Satan. You didn't work with him. But there's healing you have to rest to have healing, and you have to reset to have healing. And I think that is just so important. So I think you have to have that underworld aspect, which is why I think it's so relatable. It's part of who we are.
Makes you more human, and as well as makes you more in touch with others when you face that side of you, especially when you are taking the deep dive into your underworld, really seeing those parts where you do not even want to look at, but it's through the state of self-acceptance. And I usually like to tell people that, and even ask my guests, like, this is the last question, which will be yours. How do you find self-acceptance in yourself, and as well as seeking the empowerment in your journey?
Yeah, absolutely. So I found it through, for me personally, like finding that self-acceptance and finding that self-love in my journey. I did find it through writing, because there were so many parts. Like I say all the time, if you can pick up any one of my books, and you're going to see insights into personal struggles that I have had. In accepting love, in giving love, in finding your place in the world. I think that those are 3 core themes that appeared in the first 3 books of that series, and they very much mimicked situations that I was going through. So for me, I had to write it out through the lens of a deity that I have worked with in my spiritual practice, to then find a way to kind of integrate and circumvent some of that, and pull it into my own life. So I have found a lot of self-acceptance through writing characters like Nyx, who we don't have any stories for, and is so powerful and is so important. And it's such a beautiful example of that rest and understanding, but also action at the same time. Like this beautiful, confusing duality, which isn't really confusing at all. I found so much self-love because for a little while, when I was writing my stories, I transferred that self-love onto one of these deities or into a character or something like that. And I wrote it out and made someone else accept it in the realms of a plot line. So then I accepted it. And that, for something to me, which has been such a healing process, to dictate and write mythology that is so closely aligned with my spiritual practice as well, because again, not something that I would have grown up with. Nobody is out there like writing new stories or anything like that. So the opportunity to take such active ownership in that grand tradition helped me find my place in the world and accept that wholeheartedly, and accept the mysteries that come with it, and accept the hardships that come with it, and all of that, because it has shown me such a bigger worldview and where I fall amongst that. So for me, it all comes back to getting to write it out, and getting to put that to paper, and help bring another lens to the conversation of some of these gods and goddesses stories. For me, is just the ultimate healing experience. Because there's a lot of stuff in there that's like, Perseus is an asshole. Like these are rhetorics that I want to correct or adjust, or flip the lens on. And I think getting the chance to just put pen to paper has made all the difference in me siphoning through some of those feelings, and then taking what I need to take from it, and then leaving what I need to leave, like dropping what I need to drop. I can kind of, take it or leave it as I need to, and sort of like do what I say, not as I do, except I write it and then I have to make myself do it.
Yeah, I definitely love like the way you write your stories as well. Like even reading like your samples and like your books in general, it's just like, even you pouring in so much love to those pages, like you could definitely feel all that you've experienced in your life, and as well as all the reflections of what you've gone through. It's just, it clearly shows in terms of the characters that you animated so eloquently. It's just like, it's stunning, and all the pages that you've written. So it's really beautiful. Of course. Oh my gosh. So stunning. And especially you pointing out to Nyx, like Nyx is like, she has like such a great big space in my heart as well.
I love her. I love her so much. I love her so much. There's a scene in that book where I have her that was so healing. So I have a lot of mother wound stuff.
Yes.
And there's a scene where very specifically I had Nyx with meeting with Gaia, who predates some of the other Titans, and is even older than Nyx. So she's about as old as they get. So even that, that was so healing for me to write, in terms of this like all powerful, like incredible, cosmic, amazing goddess Nyx, like still taking refuge in the pit of the underworld, and the darkest pit of the underworld, to talk to Mama Gaia and to like still get advice and stuff. So that there's scenes in that book that were so healing, especially Hecate too. Hecate is, there was no filter in that one. I wrote myself into that character without a second's hesitation. It's a joy. It is just absolutely so much fun. It is, I'd recommend it. Write Greek myth if you haven't. It's a blast.
I'm sure. Yeah, because you're just expelling all of the stuff out and putting into paper.
Yeah.
There's just something healing in the quality.
Yeah.
That when you actually start doing those things. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
But I would love for you to let people know where they could find you, and as well as purchase your books, because oh my gosh, it's like Consort of Darkness, I know is your first one, but I know you wrote many others.
Yes.
Where can you find your work, and as well as connect with you?
Yes, absolutely. So you can connect with me on Instagram. I'm at the Bibliophile Blonde. All of my links are there, but you can also find me. I'm available at some independent bookstores, Barnes & Noble, and Amazon. Amazon's probably the quickest way to find all of them. Some of the other retailers are a little hit or miss whether they have them. If you search Molly Tullis on Amazon, my catalog will come up. The Asphodel series is the series that we've been talking about this whole time, that features the Greek gods. So they are all standalone novels, but they take place in the same universe, interconnected. There are 4 books out right now. We talked about Nyx and Hecate. Thanatos, god of death, is book 3. And there's a little novella as well with Hermes, because I couldn't leave Mercury well enough alone. He demanded his own story. His is a very playful, very fun, playful romp. So you can find that series there. I would say Amazon's probably your quickest and easiest bet, but I am also available at independent bookstores and Barnes & Noble. And yeah, Bibliophile Blonde on everything. It's my username pretty much everywhere.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Molly, for joining. And I cannot wait to have you again on the show. And yes,
be fantastic.
I cannot wait for the opportunity, but we'll see what we're up to next time. So thank you so much for joining me on the Aligned Stars podcast, and I will see you soon. Be well.
See you soon. Bye-bye.